So glad that you are with us for our second of the 3 Edward lectures for this year, sponsored by the Louisville Seminary. I am Claudette Snorton. I am the senior pastor of Lambkins Chapel Christian Methodist Episcopal Church in Louisville, Kentucky. And I'm also the co-director of the Nehemiah Project, which is the brainchild of the Louisville Seminary's Black Church Studies program, which is directed by Reverend Dr. Angela Kauser. Now, the Edward Lecture Series honors Dr. George Edwards and his wife, Jean. Dr. Edwards served Louisville Seminary for 27 years as a professor of New Testament. Together, the Edwards shared a ministry that was active in the Christian efforts of peace and social justice. The Black Church Studies program and the Nehemiah Project share the goals of persons having power and not just being empowered. We all know without peace and without justice, there is no power. I will now turn my time over to Dr. Kauser, where she will introduce our speaker of the evening.
Thank you, friend, Reverend Snorton. Thank you so much. I have the distinct honor and pleasure tonight of introducing our second Edwards lecturer, and that is Dr. Camille Lewis Brown Privette, who serves currently as the Associate Superintendent for School Leadership and Community Programs for the Archdiocese of Baltimore, Maryland. Dr. Privette holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in history from Franklin and Marshall College, a Master of Arts in Theology from St. Charles Borromeo Seminary, and a PhD in Educational Administration from Boston College. Dr. Privette founded the Bakhita Fund to provide educational assistance to children around the world. She has been a missionary to the motherland, to Africa, for 17 years, and taught for 11 years at St. Charles Borromeo Seminary in Philadelphia. During her 27 years in Roman Catholic education, Dr. Privette has been a teacher, principal, author, lecturer, and leader. She has penned many articles and 4 books, most notably African Saints, African Stories, 40 Holy Men and Women. Dr. Privette, we are distinctly honored to have you in our midst, in our house this evening. The next hour is yours, and we are glad to receive your teaching. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I thank God for you. And I certainly thank God for this opportunity just to share some thoughts and maybe share some stories. So what we're going to do, first of all, I'm going to share my screen. There I am. And okay, let's see. Let me. There we go. So I just, again, welcome everyone. Just so you know, this topic, the history of Black Catholics in the United States, it was part of my course load at St. Charles Seminary, a 14-week course. So when I received the invitation to speak this evening, of course, I jumped at the opportunity and I said, Lord, you're going to have to take this, because what can I say in the time allotted that will certainly be meaningful, that will be encouraging, life-giving, and always uplifting. So when we share our gifts, those are my prayers all the time for us. What I would like to do is to just stop and just acknowledge that God is in our midst, especially during this Lenten season. And so going to have just an offering of a Lenten prayer. This text is from the book of Isaiah, Isaiah 58, 1-11. And certainly what I did, I forwarded the entire PowerPoint to Mr. Taylor, and certainly please share it out at some point with everyone. But according to the book of Isaiah, I just want to read these lines to you. And I put my favorite line on the PowerPoint. But the text reads, "Cry out full-throated and unsparingly. Lift up your voice like a trumpet blast. Tell my people their wickedness and the house of Jacob their sins. They seek me day after day and desire to know my ways. Like a nation that has done what is just and not abandoned the law of their God. They ask me to declare what is due them, pleased to gain access to God. Why do we fast and you do not see it? Afflict yourselves and you take no note of it. Lo, on your fast day, you carry out your own pursuits and drive all your laborers. Yes, your fast ends in quarreling and fighting, striking with wicked claw. Would that today you might fast so as to make your voice heard on high. Is this the manner of fasting I wish, of keeping a day of penance? That a man bow his head like a reed and lie in sackcloth and ashes? Do you call this a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? This rather is the fasting that I wish, releasing those bound unjustly, untying the thongs of the yoke, setting free the oppressed, breaking every yoke, sharing your bread with the hungry, sheltering the oppressed and the homeless, clothing the naked when you see them, and not turning your back on your own. Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your wound shall quickly be healed. Your vindication shall go before you, and the glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then, when you call, and the Lord will answer, and you shall cry for help, and he will say, here I am. If you remove from your midst oppression, false accusation, malicious speech, if you bestow your bread on the hungry and satisfy the afflicted, then the light shall rise before you in the darkness. Then the Lord will guide you always. And I want to end by saying the word of the Lord. Amen. I offer that to you as that has been my Lenten prayer these days and will continue until the Lord says, look, here's something else I have on your heart. But this particular text is so meaningful, especially now when we have so many of our brothers and sisters in need. And then we ourselves have so many knots to untie. It really does in this life involve giving of ourselves. And so my little theme song for Lent for this year that I'm sharing with you, because the Spirit asked me to, if you want to be happy, give yourself away. Do something for someone else. And so let us begin. The history of Black Catholics in the United States. We must offer some love and gratitude for Father Cyprian Davis. Father Davis wrote the history of Black Catholics in the United States, and his text remains what some of us called sort of the Bible of Black Catholicism. If we are doing any research on the history of Black Catholics in the United States, we go to this text first. Father Davis wrote from our African roots all the way into 1990 when he published this text. And then actually at his death in 2015, he was writing an update of this version, bringing us into the 21st century. So we give some love to Father. But where do we begin? When we talk about the history of Black Catholics, I always want to say that the Catholic Church welcomes everyone. Why? Because the name in itself means universal. It is a name that says everyone is welcome to belong, to sit around God's altar, that no one should be turned away. Now, if you know anything about the Catholic Church, that hasn't always been the case. And as we will see tonight, there is a history where this hasn't been the case. But let us move on. There is scriptural evidence of a Black presence in the church. Early on in the New Testament, when we look at even Acts 8, I've given you the text, 26 to 39. This is the story of the Apostle Philip and the Ethiopian. There's an Ethiopian eunuch. We are told that this is a very, very wealthy man. He holds the treasury of the Candaces, the queens in Ethiopia, and he is on his way home to Ethiopia. Now, when we read this text in Acts, I think sometimes we should stop and say, hey, who is this man and where is he going? And what is he really asking? He's asking this apostle, I'm reading this text from Isaiah, but I don't understand. So what's to prevent you from explaining it to me? Well, he does. And then he says, baptize me. So in antiquity, what we know is that if you are a wealthy person, number one, you're in a chariot. You're not walking. You have a caravan with you. And most of your household would be with you. So when the Philip baptizes this Ethiopian, he's not just baptizing him, this man of prominence in the queen's court. He's baptizing his whole entourage. The text tells us that they continue on their way rejoicing. So my sense tells me that unless something stopped them from getting back to Ethiopia, we know here is scriptural evidence in the first century of the church that Christianity went back to the motherland. So there is, and I'll talk about some other scriptural evidence in a minute, but I always like to point to, there's a Byzantine emperor, Justinian. He becomes prominent because of his role in sending missionaries to Africa. And we will talk about him very shortly, a little bit more, but what's key is his wife, Theodora. And I really wish someone somewhere would do some research on Theodora, because as the empress, she always tried to one-up her husband. So if Justinian was going to send missionaries to Africa, she's going to get her own missionaries and send them to Africa, which she does. Causes lots of confusion, but she does it. If Justinian was printing coins with his face on it, she's going to do it too, which she does. It was always this one-upmanship, but just an interesting person in history. If we were to look a little at scripture, again, I always throw the challenge out. Let's look at geography. So if we look at the Old Testament, my two favorite places to look for Black presence is always in the book of Jeremiah. There are several places throughout Jeremiah, Jeremiah 18, but Jeremiah 38 talks about a man by the name of Abimelech. If you go to that text, the noting of Abimelech says that he's a Cushite. So I say, stop, let's look at geography. Cushite, where is Cush? Well, it's on the east coast of Africa. That is the story when Jeremiah was thrown into the cistern. We read that text all the time throughout our Catholic and our Christian churches. We know it well. We know that Jeremiah went to the king and begged, Abimelech went to the king and begged for the life of Jeremiah, and he's released from the cistern. So we know that a Black man was doing all this, very influential, moving around very early on in the Old Testament. Another one of my favorite texts is Numbers 12. Fascinating, fascinating story about Moses, his sister Miriam, and their brother Aaron. They were upset with their brother over Zipporah, the Cushite woman. And again, I go ding, 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 let's stop. What just happened there? We know that Moses married a woman of color and his brother and sister had something to say about it. That's what Numbers was about. And Miriam ended up getting punished by God over this whole story. The last image that I would like to give to you before going on. See, again, I want to just keep painting this picture that there was a Black presence all throughout the Bible. Many, 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 many texts. These are just some of my favorite ones. But in the New Testament, we have in Matthew 27:30, Matthew 27:32, this shows up, and in Mark 15:21, if you keep keeping notes. This is the story of Jesus going to Calvary. And we're told that Jesus falls the third time. And while he's walking, there is a man who was pressed into service. And we're told his name is Simon of Cyrene. And that here's my ding, ding, ding goes off in my head again. Where's Cyrene? Who is this man and where is he coming from? Cyrene is in North Africa. It's firmly positioned in the motherland. So we've seen many Hollywood movies about Greatest Story Ever Told. We King of Kings, all, okay? I put in the Greatest Story Ever Told because for the first time when we see this story played out, Jesus falls the third time. And what happens? The camera zeroes in on the image of our hero, Simon, played by Sidney Poitier. And he is drawn into the story. And they're drawn in as these Black hands reach down and pick up Jesus's cross. And for the first time, this image, all watching all these Easter stories, not only do these hands pick up Jesus' cross, but Sidney Poitier, somebody directed him to reach around and pick up Jesus too. So we're drawn into this very, very moving story. We're coming into the Easter season. If you have a chance to see what I described, see if that movie kind of matches up to the text that we've given you. Okay, so let's look at some of our African roots. I said we were going to talk about Justinian. He sends his missionaries to Nubia. We know about this history in Nubia. The Nubians had rich documents. They had a definite liturgy. They had a legal system. Evidence there suggests that they wrote in Greek. They spoke in Greek, but also they had this Coptic language of Egypt and the Nubian tongue. Lots of things were going on there. Our friend Theodora Wyatt, I wish somebody would research this woman. Justinian is following Catholic teaching about the person of Jesus. So when he sends missionaries there, they know that they're going with the understanding from the history of the church that Jesus is fully human and fully divine. He has two natures. Theodora, she says, no, I'm not believing that. She sends her missionaries and they go there and they have this thought that Jesus's humanity was swallowed up by his divinity. So he only has one nature. She never could get in alignment with her husband on this Catholic faith. But anyway, she sends her missionaries. And there's lots of other stories about her, but we can't do that tonight. I just wanted to mention St. Anthony of Egypt because he is known as the founder of Christian monasticism. So here we are, we have this Black man in Egypt. He's a hermit. He draws other people into the church. And not only is the church growing, we have the church in Egypt and we know Ethiopia, and it is spreading. I mention him because before there was an established church in Europe, Ireland, and even in England, there was an established church in the motherland. We have all of this evidence of a rich part of our history, at least on the east coast of Africa. And then to mention our 3 early African popes. Now, there's some people that want to debate this story about whether they were part Roman, whether they were part African. But the fact remains, they have self-identified they're African. I did have the opportunity, I'm going to say the 3 names real quick. Victor I, then there was Miltiades, and then Gelasius I. I had an opportunity to go to Rome, and I couldn't wait to get into the catacombs because in early church history, Christians were buried in the catacombs. And not only that, but something about the person was on the rock, the embeddedness where they were entombed. And I was there standing outside of where Miltiades was originally buried. And above, I mean, of course, they've now have moved his body into the Vatican, but where he was entombed, there it was Africanus. He was an African man. So, you know, my knowledge tells me we had 3 African popes. There are people who are still researching this. I am too. But in my book on the history on African saints, I identify all 3 complete with their history, what they did for the church. And last but not least, I want to just give a mention to King Alfonso the Good of the Congo. He was a man who very much accepted the faith. He wanted so much to convert his people. But in this zeal to convert his people, he also wanted to profit from the Europeans' knowledge of how to raise money, how to get money. And at the time, the Europeans had a very deep, thirsty, however you want to put it, appetite for slavery. Second thing that he wanted to be able to control some of this Portuguese. The Portuguese people at the time were really coming into the country, getting slaves out, and they had a very rich appetite for this. So those were his 2 hopes. Of course, it ended badly for him as he was getting so close to the Europeans that his own people became subjects of slavery. Wasn't a really good story, but we do have that evidence that early on the faith was in Africa. That was only my only point that I wanted to make by all these stories. One of the things that I'm going to really work on, I am a storyteller. If I could get a hold of a story, I believe I could tell the story. It's better to tell stories than try to say, well, in 1542, this happened in 19, something happened, but I'll tell the story. And people will remember stories because I believe that history is a story. You got to tell it. So what I will try to do is not to spend all our time with stories, but to give you some of the history too. So the history of Black Catholics in the United States officially begins, what's recognizable as the starting point is in 1540, when we have an explorer. His name is Esteban or Estebancio. Either one of these ways, if you see his name, you know it's the same person. And he's traveling with Spanish explorers, and they are coming up the Southwest. The only problem is coming up through the Southwest at that time, exploring the Americas. The Zuni Indians of the Southwest are very distrustful of white people. And so what happens with him, the white explorers send him out as their forerunner. What's the problem here? He goes and he says, I'm here to talk to you about the Catholic faith. I'm here to talk to you. I'm with these explorers. Well, the Zuni Indians do not believe this. And so they end up killing him. So the alliance never does happen. But his footprints are here. And there's more to his story. Some people want to have the conversation about whether he was Muslim or not. In the conversation, we know, wait a minute, the Spanish were Catholic. Why would they send a Muslim out to be their front runner? We believe that he was a Catholic man who was traveling with all of these other Spanish Catholics, and they sent him out as a man of color. Anyway, to move on, let's talk about the slavery question, because we have to get to it. When we talk about slavery in the history of Black Catholics, we make sure that there is a very defined way of understanding slavery in Europe. It was always there. And then what happened to this concept of slavery once it reached these American shores. In Europe, you could have been a slave because you had a debt or because of warfare. Well, once you settled the debt, you could be released from slavery, or if your people settled the debt, you could be released. The other thing, through warfare, at some point in time, you could be assimilated into that culture. So it wasn't that you and your heirs and assigned forever were enslaved. Fast forward, we are here in the United States, and the concept of slavery has morphed into something else. We have some people who have come to these shores as indentured servants. That's one view. And those indentured slave servants at some point could have paid off their bond. But for the most part, we have men and women and children who are captured on some part of the motherland and have come here to these shores, these Americas, as servants forever. And not only are they servants forever, but they're assigned, all of their heirs forever. The issue with that, and again, this is another long conversation, they are not regarded as people. They are regarded as property. There's never intended to be assimilation. So two different. When we look through various texts of people in Europe and their concept of slavery, the thing about slavery in America, it took a very long time for the European senses to understand, well, people of goodwill anyway, to understand, hey, wait a minute, that's not the same thing. And I mention that because by 1839, we officially have a pope in Rome acknowledging this is wrong. And he begins to write and to speak out against the slave trade. And this is Pope Gregory the 16th. Now, a lot of things happen after this point. He orders the American clergy to stop. He says none of this is sanctioned by Rome. And what happens after this, after he writes this apostolic letter, putting like the kibosh on slavery. So many of the American clergy, one, remain silent, or two, just totally ignore what is happening from Rome. One of the religious communities of priests, I'm just going to pick out one, the Jesuits. And I love the Jesuits. I went to Boston College. All right. But they continue to own slaves, have plantations, profit from slavery and all that it means. And so they are heavily sanctioned by Rome, and their charter is taken away. What does that mean? Well, as far as Rome is concerned, they're no more. There can be no more priests ordained. There are no more Jesuits as far as Rome concerned. This is a very, very serious situation. I say that because it's the situation of the American church. This business of a silent church is huge. And it really would take me like 2 weeks to talk about it. I'm going to take 2 minutes to talk about it. I say that it's Christ's image in Black because before the Civil War, who are these members of this Black Catholic community? Who are the people? Because there's certainly Black Catholics there. Some of them are slaves, some of them are free people. All of this Black Catholicism is going on. The church is growing in numbers with Black Catholics, and there's a reason for it. But the oppression is still there. The silence of the American clergy still there. We note that in St. Augustine, Florida, here's the first parish in the United States. It's the oldest Black community of Black Catholicisms in the United States. Why? Because in Florida, if you were a slave and you could get there, you got your freedom. But once the slaves were there, they had to convert to the Catholic faith. And then they became protected under the arm of the state. The Spanish owned the place at the time, so then they had to Spanish language, all right? There were all kinds of complicated interrelationships going on at the time. Even the sacramental books of the parishes list slaves. They list free Blacks. They list you by your color, your shades of color. If you were dark, if you were lighter, all of this was listed, still listed if you want to go down and thumb through all of these archives. Very complex Catholic society. When you were baptized, you had a status. Oh my, okay. And there was this like religious significance. Once you became baptized, you got a story. You became into being. Same type of thing was happening in Louisiana at the time. But what I want to say is the church was silent. Why? So very, very briefly, let me just tell you about one of my people from history. His name is Orestes Brownson. He was a Presbyterian minister. And he decides that he's going to become a Universalist. He decided after being a Universalist minister that he's going to become a Catholic. But interesting, he has some ideas. First of all, he said, women are inferior to men. No vote for women, no vote for the Blacks. He opposes slavery. Why does he oppose slavery? Because he said that slavery was so bad that no one could possibly survive it. So if you just leave the problem to itself, the Blacks are going to eventually die out, problem solved. And that's how he solved it. He always stays on my mind because I said, how could he process all of that? But that's what he did. It's going to take care of itself. Don't worry. And you know what? He would be so surprised because here we are, right? Here we are. Let's talk about before and after the Civil War. Who were the people? Who were the people who were lifting our ancestors up? It didn't matter whether you were Catholic or not Catholic. I put these women's names out there because all of them wanted to teach our ancestors how to read. All of them wanted to give a good, solid education to our children. All of them were concerned about social justice and what was right, especially at a time when their church wasn't speaking out. but these women were. They are all women of color. I want to say that religious life for women really began in Kentucky, 1824. I always cite this first because the community did exist, and they were founded by Father Charles Nearnix. I always call his name, say his name, because he tried to do what was right. He was a white man, he tried to do what was right. But at his death, everything just sort of fell apart. And the community did not survive. None of their records survived, but documentation, letters say, you know what, there was a community of women. What we have to do is come to 1829, Mother Mary Lang. In 1828, she and 3 of her friends, they were all Black women, they were all immigrants here in Baltimore. They decide, we're going to educate Black children. It was against the law to educate slaves. 1829, Maryland is a slave state. And these brave women said, we want to teach the children the catechism. We can't teach them the catechism unless they can read. So in 1828, they founded St. Francis Academy, and that school is still in operation today, teaching children of all colors. Mother Lang, as you might have seen from the handouts, her cause was presented to Rome. She's on the road to sainthood. So we have to just keep that matter in prayer. In 1845, Sister Therese Duchemin Maxis. If anybody's from the Pennsylvania area, the Monroe, Michigan area, this woman is well known there. She started the Sister Servants of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, otherwise known as the IHMs. Again, they want to educate girls. Girls need an education. This is not popular during the time. In 1852, if you're from Louisiana, this woman is hugely popular in the area, again on the road to sainthood. Mother Henriette de Lille. She was a woman of color that, again, did what was known as the impossible, but she did educate children. And in Savannah, Georgia, Mother Matilda Beasley did the same. You notice that I have 2 dates there. And the reason why I have 1885 to 1889, this woman, her main thing is that she wanted to be a sister, but in that area of Savannah, Georgia, she could not find a religious community to join. So she went to Rome. And we don't have a definitive date of when she became a sister there, but she did. She comes back to the United States, and she really does struggle in her mission to take care of children. The people on our slide here in their time were the most recognizable men in America. The first gentleman here is Father Augustus Tolton, and his cause is in Rome. Pray God he will be a saint soon. But a very intelligent man, spoke many, many, many languages. He could not get accepted to a seminary. He tried for 7 years to get into a seminary so that he could study to be a priest, and no one would accept him. He goes to Rome and he is ordained 1886. It's his prayer that he gets mission to Africa, but then he's told, no, you go back to America. You make a difference in America. And he caught every kind of trouble when he came back here because there were no recognizable African-American priests. I will say that there were 3 African priests, African-American priests. I know I just said something and then I told you something else. I'll tell you why. There were 3 brothers. They were the Healy brothers. You can write their names down and check out them later. But the Healy brothers, their mother was a slave, and their father was an Irish plantation owner. And there were, excuse me, there were 11 children. These three boys look more white than they did black. And so they gained an opportunity to be ordained, and the three of them never fessed up that they were black. So that's a whole nother lecture series there, just on the Healy family. I have concerns because when Father Augustus Tolton, who clearly is black, there's no way for him to pass. And he shows up dressed like this. He caught every kind of trouble because he was the first recognizable African-American priest. He's saying mass. He is hearing confessions. And in Illinois, where he ended up being, a high immigrant population. What happened with Father Tolton, he spoke Polish, German, French, almost every possible language that people coming to America, they were settling along that Chicago waterway area, and they wanted mass said in their native language. The only place to go was to Father Tolton's church. You want to get married in your native language. Where are you going? You're going to Father Tolton. You see where I'm going with this story? You want someone to hear your confession in your language, you're going to Father Tolton. So his church gets crowded with all these immigrants, all white immigrants. And also there are black former slaves there as well. And his white brother priest despised him. As you can see, financially, if I'm a white person and I get Father Tolton to marry him, I'm going to stay in his church. I'm bringing my tithes to Father Tolton's church. This is no good for his white brother priests, but this is what happens. And so not only was he the most recognizable man in America, but he was the loneliest man in America too. All right, these other three, Father Charles Uncles and John Dorsey and Father Plantvine, they were the first three African American men who were ordained here in the United States. And they were ordained by the Josephite priests. The Josephites, I mentioned them because they were formed to minister to the African American community. It was their task to evangelize, to bring more Blacks into the Catholic Church. And their stories are just phenomenal. It's a phenomenal story, all of them. So you can imagine what happened when they were deployed into the South. They started in Baltimore, and then they went all over the South, and just incredible life of oppression and discrimination and hatred. But anyway, so let's move on. And I'm just trying to be honest about my time. Ooh, okay. All right, we can do this. So here we are, the rise of the laity. We're coming into the 19th, into the 20th century. Just going to briefly mention Daniel Rudd and the Congress movement. Daniel Rudd, very, very intelligent newspaper man. He decides that he is also Catholic. He says it's time for the laity to step forward because the Catholic Church can break this color line. And he is going to lead the way with his newspaper. He's going to write articles about the Catholic Church. He's going to write articles about Black people in the Catholic Church. And he's going to make this a place for everyone, that universal. He's bringing it in. So he begins this Congress movement. And I keep mentioning, I'm going to mention this Congress movement because it is still alive today. There is a National Black Catholic Congress office here in Maryland, and they connect Black Catholics across the world. Another mover and shaker is Dr. Thomas Wyatt Turner. I have to mention him as the second founder of this Black Catholic movement. He's a professor, very intelligent. He decides that we have to unite Black Catholics even further. So he wants to provide education. He wants to provide all kinds of positive images in the Catholic Church for Black leadership. And so as a professor, he knows exactly how to do that. And so he founds the Federated Colored Catholics. In Baltimore, there's the Society of colored Catholics. And again, everybody's trying to unite everyone and to be of service to everyone. The Knights and Ladies of Peter Claver, founded in 1909, they are still in existence today to serve other people. So why would I even want to mention the Knights of Peter Claver when we all might have heard about the Knights of Columbus? Well, the Knights of Columbus in 1909, they were not admitting Black people. So Black laity said, we'll find our own organization for service and to take care of our own selves. And so we have the Knights of Peter Claver today, very, very active all over the United States. So in the interest of time, I want to move ahead and talk about some other movers and shakers. Normally in the history of Black Catholics in the United States, we would not talk about our African-American heroes that you see their images here, W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. But when I give my lectures on the history of Black Catholics, I always mention them because the US political and social climate affected Black Catholics and still do today. And we'll talk about some other things that are going on today on the political front. But how did the work of our two heroes, because they are heroes, African-American heroes, how did they impact us? The same way they impacted everybody else. W.E.B. Du Bois, he was certainly a very intelligent man, an academic, and he said, it's time for educational and economic equality and full social equality right now. He's not trying to wait. And so his whole thing is that he wrote The Souls of Black Folks. That was his mover and shaker document from 1903. And the most memorable line in there for me is he said, the issue of the 20th century will be the color line. Well, here we are. We can say the same thing over and over, this color line. But we want to mention W.E.B. Du Bois because he founded the NAACP. We want to mention him because of all of the talks that he gave to try to pull Blacks together in a most unusual way of, hey, we can do this. We're intelligent people. Let's move ahead. So I think I would be remiss if I can't get into this conversation, but W.E.B. Du Bois supported women's rights. So we're right here in National Women's History Month. I got to throw that out there. Booker T. Washington had a sort of another way of us getting to equality. And, you know, he was an American educator, founded Tuskegee Institute. Why I'm throwing this out here is, though Du Bois said, we want all this now, Booker T. Washington said, well, let's work for it. We know about agriculture. Let's keep working in agriculture. We can get to our educational opportunities. We can get there. So the two of them didn't see eye to eye. If you're taking notes, please write down to read more about the Atlantic Compromise. That Booker T. Washington said that the Southern Blacks can work. They can keep working with basic education. They'll have economic opportunities. He was looking more in long range vision. W.E.B. Du Bois said, right now. So just kind of two divergent philosophies on how to take our ancestors. In the 20th century, many of us know about the Harlem Renaissance. And I know I'm throwing some of these concepts out here, and maybe you're thinking, what in the world does that have to do with Black Catholics? Because there were so many things going on in the Harlem Renaissance that allowed Black Catholics to emerge, that allowed them to make a significant contribution, not just only to the church, but to the American society. And I've just listed a few people of what they've done. So Black Catholics are emerging. In the 20th century, Claude Mckay, very famous poet, he's credited with launching this Renaissance through some of his writings. The only thing about Claude Mckay, and I love his poetry, and I invite you to read more of his poetry. He decided that 1922, communism sounded really good. Why? Because when you think about communism, the equality, he was tied up with the equality of everybody's on the same footing. We're all equal. We don't get that here in the United States. So he moved to Russia. But when he went to Russia and he found out, yes, the philosophy is that they were all together. They're all equal, all workers. But somebody always had to lead to make sure. And it's at that moment when the person or people step forward to lead that we're not all equal anymore. So he came back to the United States, but the Black community would not accept him. But he continued to write about the Catholic Church, breaking that color line. He kept saying in his writings that we're all welcome in the church, which we all were. But it was just unfortunate that I guess his writings do not get the credit that they deserve because of that one sort of understanding. Just briefly, Ellen Terry from New York, she was another Catholic writer. Llewellyn Scott, I mentioned him because he was a friend of Dorothy Day, and I don't know if anybody on the call knows about Dorothy Day and you know, all the work that she did with the homeless, especially in New York. But he took all of his money and he built hospice and provided food, especially for the dying. Just the most unusual life of Llewellyn Scott. I mentioned Emma Lewis, Mother Emma Lewis from Philadelphia. I don't know if anybody is tied to Philadelphia on this call, but she decided that children need to read. Well, public schools weren't accepting children, Catholic children. They also needed to know their catechism about the church, about the Bible, couldn't learn that in school. So she just decided to start educating children out the back of her kitchen. And that house, that kitchen, became a church. And the Catholic Church in Philadelphia had to build around that, and it became an African-American parish in Philadelphia. Just her whole life was just about that. She did the same thing when she moved to New Jersey, and St. Monica's was established there. Everybody's about saving African-American children and African-American families, like that rootedness of who we are. And then the last person that I want to bring up tonight is Dr. Lena Edwards from Washington, D.C. She spent her whole life working in obstetrics. She wanted to make sure that healthy babies were born, especially in the African-American community. And she fought to get rights in maternity centers and hospitals so that she could bring women in to get proper health care. Just a fabulous, fabulous life. Of what most noted in history about her, 1968, President Johnson gives her this Medal of Freedom, which is the highest honor that a civilian can get from the government. Just all wonderful Catholic people that contributed. And as I started out saying, not just to the church, but to American society, just phenomenal. And our hero of the night, Father Cyprian Davis, just said, Harlem was our field of action. Lots was going on. There were some movers and shakers there like Langston Hughes and County Cullen and James Weldon Johnson. So many people just there contributing. So let me just kind of talk about a little bit here, some roots of our African-American spirituality that affects all of us, whether you're in the Catholic Church or you're not in the Catholic Church, but formed in separation and suffering. I actually borrowed these questions from Dr. Diana Hayes, who was teaching at Georgetown University. And she said, here are the 3 questions for us. I'm watching my time. She said, who is God for African Americans? She said, what is the meaning of the death, resurrection of Jesus Christ for all of us? And what is the meaning and purpose of Black existence in the United States? And I love how she framed those three questions, because then she followed up saying, once we as individuals can answer these and accept how our spirituality is rooted, then we can look at separation. Our people, against their will, our ancestors were pulled from their African roots. They were forced to endure the Middle Passage. They were forced to accept a new culture and a land. And in the suffering, they were being torn from their homeland and all that was familiar. Freedom, family, culture, and their language was taken away. And that there was physical and mental abuse. So we would think that this is a downer. When I teach my classes, my students say, oh my God, that is so much. But out of this emerges our spirituality. All of this is linked in song, in chants, in movement. It has strengthened us as a people. It's energetic. There's some life-giving, there's some involvement of our whole selves, our minds, our bodies, our imaginations, our memories, our emotions, all of who we are. And as a Black Catholic, I follow Sister Thea Bowman, another person who's up for sainthood. Sister Thea said, we bring our whole Black selves into this Catholic Church. All that we are, our movement, our spirituality, our families, everything that God put upon us, we bring it in. And so we bring this sort of authenticity into the church. It just gets me moving, that I can bring my whole self here. What we have seen at Her and Heard is a document from the US Catholic bishops from 1984. So in that document, and again, we can have whole classes on the document, but the US Catholic bishops talk about Black spirituality, our rootedness in our families, how we worship, our liturgies, our education, and especially in African-American families, the education that we want for our children. We want them to be somehow better off than we were. So we make sacrifices for our children. And then this last E, that evangelization, the spreading of the gospel, that getting people to turn towards Jesus is phenomenal. So in the history of Black Catholics in the United States, we come to this era of you and I, this era of forming missionary disciples for our church. Now, whatever church we belong to, I believe all of us are bringing people to the gospel. That's our function. The history of Black Catholics, this is what we're doing. We're still talking about missionary disciples in my church every weekend. Pastors talking about missionary disciples. What are you doing? Missionary Disciples Society, street ministry, all of this. We want the holy name of Jesus coming out of every mouth. So, and we keep on that mission until God calls us home. But we are in an age of discrimination. We have Black Lives Matter movement. Isn't this something that we have to say out of our mouths, Black Lives Matter? As Christians, we know we're made in the image and likeness of our great God. So of course our lives matter. Racial profiling, inequitable housing, hiring, and incarceration, workforce development. I want to just stop for 1 second on workforce development, because I have a friend at the Catholic Center, and he is director of prison ministry. And he talks to me all the time about people who are incarcerated, and when they come out of being incarcerated, unless they have an opportunity to have a job, house, medical care, you know, buy food, all these kinds of things, unless they are in place, the likelihood of them going back into prison system is very high. So we need to have workforce development. And not that, you know, John Brown got out of jail today, so we have to send him over here to get food stamps. He got to go over here when he's sick. He got to go. No, we need one place, because John Brown might not be able to go to all of different 5 different places. So workforce development. We're also in an era where we're still having the conversation that we need to educate our children. What's going on in our schools? Why do we still have children who cannot read and write? We're supposed to be one of the most developed and richest nations in the world. We shouldn't have children hungry and children who cannot read and write. It's incredible. And for the most part, we end up having children of color who are hungry and cannot read and write. We're in an era of political upheaval and war. So what I want to try to just say, we started off saying that the bishops, the US Catholic bishops, they didn't respond, they were silent. And that's the problem. But today they're responding. Everything that goes on in the world, some bishop is writing about it. The US Catholic bishops have already written pastoral letters about the war in Ukraine. They wrote letters when here in Baltimore, when Mr. Freddie Gray died, and when Mr. George Floyd died. They were writing letters. We were having prayer vigils. We were having walks, statements, and all in our churches. We were talking about Breonna Taylor lost her life. We were talking about it. So on this journey towards racial justice, I know that the bishops are speaking out, and I'm glad that they are speaking out. And the other thing that I am finding too, not only are the bishops speaking out, but they're partnering with other faith denominations. This whole interreligious dialogue is happening. So when Mr. Floyd died, we had an interreligious prayer service on the street with the bishops and the pastors from almost every denomination, faith denomination here in Baltimore. My husband and I went. That's not something we don't walk on the street to go have prayer, but we did when Mr. Floyd died. And everybody was there of all the denominations. So I'm just so proud to be a Christian now that we are talking to each other. What I would like to do is just, I gave the handout, so I just want to say these people's names. 6 on the road to sainthood, and then we're going to open up for some questions. We have servant of God, Mother Mary Lang. She's at the first level of going towards sainthood. With one miracle, she'll be blessed, and another miracle, she'll be canonized. Then this is Father Augustus Tolton. He's already venerable, and we're looking and praying for miracles. I talked to him. I talked about him, first African-American priest. Mother Henriette DeLille, I mentioned her name. I want to call her name again for her bravery. And then this is Pierre Toussaint from New York City. He's venerable already. If I have more time, I'll tell you a story about, well, let's see how much time we have and I could get a story in. And then next to him is Miss Julia Greeley of Denver, the Angel of Charity. And then last but not least, we have Sister Thea Bowman, the Franciscan Sister of Perpetual Adoration. She's the one that said, we better celebrate our possibilities. As Black people, we better celebrate our possibilities, all the gifts that God put upon us. Let's celebrate. So we're not down in the dumps people, no matter what history had to say. God is still calling us. We're still doing his bidding. So at that, I just want to, again, call us to Father Cyprian Davis. I want him to have the last word. And this is what he has to say about the history of Black Catholics in the United States. He said the story of African-American Catholicism is the story of a people who obstinately clung to a faith that gave them sustenance, even when it did not always make them welcome. Like many others, blacks had to fight for their faith, but their fight was often with members of their own households. Too long have Black Catholics been anonymous. It is now clear that they can be identified, that their presence has made an impact, and that their contributions have made Catholicism a unique and stronger religious body. So I want to say amen. I want to thank you for this evening and open everything up to questions.
Well, we thank you so much for joining the Louisville Seminary and Black Church Studies on tonight, and for being a part of the 2022 Edwards Peacemaking Lecture Series. What a wonderful, moving, and enlightening presentation. And I know we have several questions that are going to be coming forth. We are asking you to place those questions in the chat. It is now open for you to do so, as well as the Q&A chat as well. And based on the allotted time, we will move forward and have our speaker actually respond to some of those questions. We'll probably be closing out around 8:25, and then we will turn it over to our leader for the Nehemiah Project, Dr. Gerald Taylor. We're waiting for questions.
Typing, I'm just typing, Dr. Miller.
And I know you have a story. If they don't have questions, I would.
Oh, now see, y'all don't, you want trouble now. Okay.
I love storytelling myself.
Well, let me see, what's it? All right. If you, I will wait for some questions, and if not, I can always.
Yeah, I like this one. Wow, wow. Thank you for such a powerful teaching. I love the storytelling method. Awesome.
Well, while somebody's typing there.
I'm coming in with a question right now.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm just still typing.
Well,
so here it is, Dr. Miller. You see that?
This is from Dr. Kauser. Please, Dr. Privette, speak please to the role of women leadership, especially Black women in the 21st century.
Roman Catholic Church, yes.
Okay, all right. First of all, I'm going to acknowledge that we do not have any priests. Okay, because women are not organized, not ordained, but I will.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm going to say that in antiquity, there were women leaders. And if you go to the Bible, especially the New Testament, we have so many women leaders there, especially Lydia. If you go and read the story of Lydia, she was a definite, what I want to call a mover and a shaker. Mm-hmm. She was a dyer of purple, as the text tells us. So Paul heavily relied on her, and many other women in antiquity. We do know that there were deaconesses
Yes.
in antiquity.
Yes.
So I'm not going to say anything about ordination, but I'm going to talk to you about leadership.
All right.
Okay. The leadership in the church today, I think, takes the form of women religious and also women in the laity. There are people like myself that we work very hard in our churches and in our communities and worldwide to tell the story, our Christian story. So, I mean, at this point, I've been back and forth to Africa for 20 years, building not only up the church, but building up places where other people would not want to go. We have to keep our people alive, and we have to keep them educated. So I've spent most of my 20 years in the bush, building medical centers, building schools, just so that, you know, if you're sick and you have a scratch in the bush, that doesn't mean that you should die.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's where my efforts go. I know that there are religious communities all over the world, women of color,
Yes.
who have taken leadership in the church, and they have kept us alive spiritually and physically.
Yes.
This is still happening here in America with communities like the Oblate Sisters of Providence. I don't know how in the world those women keep going. I mean, their foundress was here in Baltimore during a cholera epidemic. And what did she do? She got women together and sent them out to take care of cholera victims. Why would you do that? So that, you know, that's one image of leadership. I mentioned Henriette de Lille, all those women's names who I mentioned, and there are untold other women. I'm keeping things here in America. I'm not going to Africa, because there's other images going on in Africa. If you know anything about St. Josephine Bakhita, that woman was a slave and she fought her way out of slavery. Just kept things going. Now she's a saint. It's just an incredible image. So, but yes, there are women in leadership who are impacting the church worldwide.
Okay, we have 3 that have come in. I'll read the first one. What role did politics play in the church?
Well, politics worldwide played a heavy image, especially here in the American church, because, you know, the bishops and political leaders were all in alignment. And I want to say that when we talk about making money, making decisions, maybe I'll give you an example from here in Baltimore. Once slavery ended after 1865, and you really were a free person. So we have people of color, but they still couldn't vote. How are they going to make a living for themselves unless they could have jobs? All this is tied in. And laws weren't acted that kept you in your place. So even if we have a person who's able, I'm going to start my own business, okay, which a lot of people did. You want to start your own business, but who's going to do business with you? Are the Blacks who don't have jobs, who can't vote, who can't be landowners, who can't buy property, who can't. So politics did affect us in that way. So, and then I kind of want to go back to the slavery movement. I don't even want to say the movement, but to say slavery. I'm really stuck right now on negative views of cultures. I don't like looking at African Americans through the lens of slavery. I don't like looking through the lens of Native American indigenous people that they lived in teepees. Like, that doesn't work with me. You better come with something positive that these people did so that we can understand their contributions. So I'm kind of stuck on that right now. But let me kind of go back. January 1, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, officially ending slavery. So that was a political move. Why is it that it wasn't until we have August of 1865 before slavery is officially politically supposed to be shut down? Took 2 years. There were lots of laws going on in between there that really weren't keeping us down, even though officially we're done in 1863. And then, as we also know, we're at August 1865 and supposed to be slavery's over, but not really, because there's a whole lot of laws. We're going through Reconstruction, still so many laws. Some of them were literacy laws, some of them were landowning laws, some of them were voting laws. And boom, we get to 1965, we got civil rights legislation. Civil Rights Act is already signed, but we still have lynchings. We still have murders that are still going on, legalized. My Lord and my God, we are at 2022, and we still have young people who are everybody losing their lives out on the street unnecessarily. So I recently had conversation with a group of people from our office. Our superintendent said, I want you to talk for a few minutes, get us to understand. How can you ask me to get you to understand 63 years of my life as a Black woman raising children in America? I raised an African-American son, and I'm gonna tell you, we talked to him about pull your pants up. We talked to him about speaking well, about representing us when you leave this house. We had all these rules in place that other families didn't have in place. Why? Because we wanted to increase the likelihood that he was going to get his body back in our house safely. So why are we going through all that in this 2022?
Yeah.
And I can't believe I'm the only Black mother that had that conversation with her son.
Right.
Okay. So I think there was another question.
I think you've touched on this one. I'm gonna mention it now because you just spoke toward it. It talks about the slavery issue in the Catholic and the emancipation. Does a form of slavery still exist today? And I think you just kind of alluded to that in that last.
I think so. In my head, I know that whenever I retire, I've written some books, but I think the plantation is still open.
Gotcha.
And that needs to be, that it's real.
Gotcha.
And because of some laws, because of racial profiling, because of all of this that we have to teach our young people, sometimes, it's not with all of us, it's sometimes it's in here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's in here. That's still slavery. That still has us chained. So how are we going to break that?
Yeah.
So that's an issue. We're going to need the Holy Spirit himself. God's going to have to, I don't know, it might keep going on till Jesus comes back. He'll break it for sure.
Well, we got two more. We'll see, can we get them in? How is a person nominated, if that is the right word, for sainthood?
Okay. What happens if a person, I'm going to use me, Camille Privette. If I have lived a life, a virtuous life, and I've helped people and I've done all this kind of stuff, when I die, somebody might say, oh, she's lived a fabulous life. I'm going to take her cause up for sainthood. So what you have to do is you have to write this document and present it to the US Catholic bishops. They have to initially accept it to say, okay, we're getting behind that. And then this process goes to Rome. If Rome says yes, keep investigating Camille Privette's life. So your life gets investigated on a historical basis and then on a theological basis.
Gotcha.
And that's what moves your life along towards sainthood.
Okay, this is the last question. Well, maybe not. But this one is from Dr. Taylor. How have Black Catholics dealt with the doctrine of discovery?
Can he put some parameters around that for me?
No, but he can speak to it.
All right, well, I'll let him speak to it.
Dr. Taylor?
I forgot which Pope produced the document that's now known as the Doctrine of Discovery, which stated that Catholicism was the only one and only true religion, and that Catholics were allowed to use any means necessary to expand the faith, including violence and genocide. And that document defined Catholic missions and ministries in Africa, South America, and the Americas for a period of time. I was always wondering, was there ever inside of Black Catholicism, the networks, discussion about that doctrine and its impact?
Okay, we haven't, during my time specifically talked about that document. However, we have talked about the Catholic Church's involvement in all of what you mentioned, especially slavery, oppression of people. I know that originally slavery was not here, but it was in South America in the area called Hispaniola, okay? The Spanish people were the original people who were enslaved. And they, were enslaved in a land that was their own. So they could escape. They knew the landscape. They had their language. They were like the worst group of people to have enslaved. So it really was a Catholic priest who came up with the idea, oh, the Africans are a great labor force, cheap, abundant labor. And so the slave trade really began off of his insistence. I wrote a document years ago when there was discussion about this particular Dominican priest to somebody take up his cause for sainthood. And I was a professor at the seminary at the time. And I said, absolutely not. And I wrote all of these reasons down. You were the impetus for Africans to be enslaved. And you were the person who said, if you take them out of their continent and move them into an area and mix up their languages, they can't escape. They don't know how to communicate with each other. They're cheap, abundant labor. Bring them to the Americas. Absolutely not. We cannot take this cause up. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is we have American clergy and religious sisters right here in the Americas in North America, who were slave owners and who benefited financially and socially from our oppression. So to be clear, and Father Davis speaks about that at length.
Great job. Last question. Is the Black Madonna and Child considered the same as the Holy Mother and Child in the Catholic Church?
Absolutely, absolutely. And there are places around the world, and praise God, I've had opportunities to go view these for myself, so I'm going to speak on them. But there are places around the world in Catholic churches where there is a Black Madonna and Black Jesus. So the first one that kind of startled me, but I had to go there and see, because I had to go to Poland, because in a town called Jasna Góra is where Our Lady of Czestochowa is housed, and there is a Black Madonna and Child there. So, but there are places all around the world with Black Madonna. So yes, this is the Mother Mary and her son Jesus in Black.
Awesome. Just before I turn it over to Dr. Taylor, once again, so many have complimented you. What a wonderful presentation, informative and inspiring. And thank you for your contribution in this series. Just great job and great information.
Thank you
Dr.
so
Taylor?
much. Thank you.
Well, Sister Camille, thank you so much. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have met you and to have a chance to invite you. It's particularly good because I was involved in the 20th Century National Black Catholic Congress with Bishop Ricard, Bishop
Yes.
Fisher, that whole network of Black bishops. I'm proud to say I was part of that first gathering and helped to engage it. So I listened to you with great memory and fondness for it, and the role that Black Catholics have played in my life in organizing I've done, including Baltimore. But this has been wonderful. This has been, for a lot of our folk would not know this history. And it's great that you've been able to present it in such a wonderfully engaging way. So again, thank you so much. And let's hope that we can talk again in the future about other things we might be able to do. So with
Absolutely. Invite me and I'll bring my stories.
that, all right.
You might say, stop, enough.
All right.
I have loads
Claudette?
of stories.
Well, thank you again. Claudette, you got us for closing prayer?
Yes, I certainly do. Thank you again for your presentation. It was great. And we certainly, I don't know about you, learned a lot. I have, when I first started teaching back.
She went silent.
Can't hear you, Claudette.
We can't hear you.
I'm just talking away. So sorry. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presentation, and just thank you for enlightening us. There's so many things that we don't know, and you just happen to, you really helped us to learn. All right, let's bow our heads for our closing prayer. We hope to see you on next Monday. Is that right? Next Monday for our next lecture. That is for presenting the first year of the Nehemiah Project. And it starts at 6:30, and that's Eastern Standard Time. So we hope that you will be with us. Bow your heads. Gracious God, we thank you for this opportunity to join together. We thank you for the knowledge that was given to us. And now, dear Lord, we just ask that you be with us and help us to know that it doesn't matter what our denominations, what our religions are, that we all love you. Now we just thank you and we just ask for your blessings. This we pray in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.